Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Broken Pieces. Maxwell Reed stood at his workbench, calloused hands moving methodically over the antique pocket watch he was restoring. At 62, his once dark hair had turned steel gray, but his piercing blue eyes remained sharp as ever. The small repair shop attached to his modest home had become his sanctuary after everything fell apart 6 years ago. The knock on his door came at precisely 7:15 a.m. 3 soft raps that shattered the morning silence. Max froze, the tiny screwdriver hovering above the watch's delicate mechanism. Nobody visited him anymore, especially not at this hour. Through the peephole, he saw her. Brooke, his daughter. Her chestnut hair, so like her mother's, hung limp around her tear-stained face. Max's heart hammered in his chest as he slowly opened the door. Brooke. His voice cracked on her name. 6 years of exile compressed into a single, painful moment. She looked older than her 33 years, exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes. I found Mom's secret phone, she whispered, her voice breaking. In her trembling hands was a battered envelope, its edges worn as if it had been opened and resealed many times. And this envelope hidden in her old jewelry box. Max stared at the items, his expression hardening. Sandra's secrets, finally surfacing. You should come in, he said, stepping aside. The last time he'd seen Brooke, she'd been screaming accusations in the hospital corridor as Sandra's body grew cold. You killed her with stress. You drove her to this. I never want to see you again. Brooke hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside. The living room remained exactly as it had been when Sandra was alive. The same furniture, the same photographs on the walls, frozen in time like a memorial. The only difference was the layer of gifts on the side table. 6 years of unopened birthday and Christmas presents Max had left on Brooke's porch, returned to him by her husband. I've been wrong, Brooke said, tears streaming down her face as she sank onto the couch. For 6 years, I've been so wrong about everything. Max didn't rush to comfort her. He'd spent too many nights alone with his rage to offer easy forgiveness now. Instead, he sat in his recliner across from her, separated by the coffee table that once held family game nights. What changed your mind? Brooke placed the phone and envelope on the table between them. I was cleaning out the storage unit last weekend. Found Mom's old jewelry box. This was inside a fake bottom. Her voice shook. I charged the phone. There were thousands of messages between her and Bradley Winters. Max's jaw tightened at the name. Bradley Winters. Sandra's doctor. The man who had consoled Brooke after her mother's death, telling her how Max's controlling behavior had stressed Sandra to the point of her fatal heart attack. And the envelope? Max asked, his voice unnervingly calm. I haven't opened it yet, Brooke admitted. I needed you to be here. Max nodded. 6 years ago, when Sandra died suddenly at 58, everyone had blamed him. His ruthless business reputation had preceded him, Maxwell Reed. The man who built Reed Construction from nothing, known for his uncompromising standards and merciless approach to competition. He was demanding, exacting, a perfectionist. It hadn't been a stretch for people to believe he'd been the same at home. A domineering husband who had driven his wife to an early grave. Only Max knew the truth. And now, perhaps, Brooke was about to discover it too. Open it, he commanded softly. Brooke's fingers trembled as she carefully opened the sealed envelope. Inside were photographs, handwritten letters, and what appeared to be medical documents. As she began to examine them, her sobbing intensified. Oh God, Dad. I'm so sorry. She managed between breaths. She was planning to leave you. She and Bradley were. She couldn't finish the sentence. Max leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. 6 years, Brooke. 6 years I've lived with your accusations. 6 years I've been a pariah in this town. 6 years I've been denied watching my grandchildren grow up. The photographs spread across the table told a story Sandra had hidden well. Her affair with Bradley had begun 3 years before her death. The medical documents revealed something even more damning. Sandra had been diagnosed with a congenital heart condition months before her death, a diagnosis Bradley had helped her conceal from everyone, including Max. Dad, please, Brooke pleaded. I didn't know. None of us knew. Max stood up slowly, walking to the window where he could see his neglected garden. Sandra had loved that garden once. There's more to this story, Brooke. Much more. But first, I need to know, where is your brother? Tyler still believes, He still thinks you were responsible, Brooke admitted. He won't talk about you at all. Max nodded, unsurprised. Then it's time you learned exactly what happened 6 years ago. Not the story Bradley Winters told you. Not the story this town has whispered behind my back. The real story. He turned to face his daughter, his eyes cold with a resolve that made Brooke shrink back. Your mother didn't just die, Brooke. She was taken from me. And unlike what everyone believes, I didn't kill her with stress. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. But I did make sure the people responsible paid for what they did. Chapter 2. Deceptive Reflections. 15 years earlier, Maxwell Reed was at the peak of his career. Reed Construction had transformed from a small local operation into the dominant force in commercial development across 3 states. At 47, Max had everything society claimed a man should want: wealth, respect, a beautiful wife, and 2 children in college. Sandra Reed had been the quintessential construction magnate's wife, elegant at business functions, charming with clients, and seemingly devoted to her family. Their sprawling craftsman home in the prestigious Lakeview neighborhood was featured in regional magazines, with Sandra's interior design choices praised for their sophistication. We were the perfect couple, Max explained to Brooke, pouring himself a finger of bourbon despite the early hour. At least, that's what everyone saw. Brooke sat rigid on the couch, the damning evidence of her mother's deception spread before her. What was it really like? She asked quietly. Your mother was unhappy for a long time, Max said matter-of-factly. She wanted more than I could give her. The cracks had begun to show in their 23rd year of marriage. Sandra's spending had increased dramatically: designer clothes, exclusive spa retreats, spontaneous trips to visit old college friends. Max, consumed with major projects that kept Reed Construction competitive, had initially dismissed the warning signs. I thought she was having a midlife crisis, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I tried to give her space, thinking she'd work through it. I was a fool. The first concrete evidence had come from an unlikely source: Wendy Tillman, the wife of Max's project manager. She'd seen Sandra at an upscale restaurant in Asheville, 2 hours from their hometown, intimately entwined with a man Wendy didn't recognize. Wendy debated whether to tell me, Max continued. She finally decided she would want to know if it were her husband. Brooke winced. How did you confront Mom? Max laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. I didn't. Not immediately. In business, I learned never to show my hand until I had all the facts. His eyes hardened. So I waited. And I watched. And I hired someone to follow your mother. The private investigator's reports had been comprehensive. Sandra met Bradley Winters every Tuesday and Thursday at a rental property he owned outside of town. Their affair had been going on for over 3 years by that point. Did it hurt? Brooke asked, her own pain evident in her voice. Not as much as you might think, Max admitted. By then, I knew your mother and I had become business partners more than lovers. What hurt was the deception, the lying, the fact that she looked me in the eye every day and pretended. What Max didn't tell Brooke was how the betrayal had awakened something cold and calculating within him, a meticulous patience he'd previously reserved for dismantling business competitors. The most disturbing discovery had come from his friend and attorney, Lewis Blackwell. During a routine review of their finances, Lewis had noticed irregularities, significant withdrawals from their joint accounts, transfers to offshore holdings, and paperwork for a recently established LLC in Sandra's maiden name. Your mother wasn't just having an affair, Max said. She was preparing to leave me and take half of everything I'd built. But she and Bradley were greedy. They wanted more than half. The evidence had been damning. Sandra had been systematically liquidating assets and hiding funds. Bradley, leveraging his position as a respected cardiologist, had been privately consulting with a divorce attorney specializing in high-net-worth separations. I confronted her in September, 6 years ago, Max recalled. I laid out everything I knew. The affair, the money, their plans. Sandra's reaction had stunned him. Rather than denial or remorse, she'd laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that had stripped away the last of his illusions about their marriage. She told me Bradley made her feel alive, that I was nothing but a walking checkbook. Max's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. She said she deserved more than half because she'd wasted 28 years with me. When Max had asked about their children, Sandra had been blunt. Tyler and Brooke were adults with their own lives. They would adjust. What did you do? Brooke asked, her face pale. Nothing, Max said simply. At least, nothing she expected. I didn't rage. I didn't threaten. I simply told her I understood, and that I'd have Lewis draw up fair settlement papers. The relief on Sandra's face had been palpable and premature. Your mother made one critical mistake, Brooke, Max said, his eyes cold. She underestimated me. Everyone did. He set down his empty glass. But I'm not the villain in this story. I'm simply the man who refused to be a victim. Brooke looked at the photographs again, her mother and Bradley Winters embracing, laughing, planning their future together. What happened next? She whispered, though part of her feared the answer. I did what I do best, Max said, rising to his feet. I built something. Not a building this time. A plan. Chapter 3, The Architect's Blueprint. Max led Brooke into his home office, a space she hadn't entered in over 6 years. Unlike the rest of the house, which remained frozen in time, this room had transformed. The walls were covered with notes, photographs, and documents connected by red string, resembling a detective's investigation board more than a businessman's workspace. What is all this? Brooke gasped, taking in the meticulous display. My blueprint, Max replied, his voice detached and professional. Every great construction project requires careful planning. In the center of the main wall was a photograph of Sandra and Bradley Winters, surrounded by satellite images of properties, bank statements, and medical records. One section was dedicated to Franklin Doherty, Bradley's medical partner. Another focused on Lydia Cantrell, the nurse who had worked closely with both doctors. After Sandra's confession, I gave myself 3 months, Max explained, gesturing to a timeline that ran along the bottom of the display. Not for reconciliation or divorce negotiations. For reconnaissance. What Max discovered had been far worse than a simple affair. Bradley Winters wasn't just sleeping with Sandra. He had a history of inappropriate relationships with vulnerable patients. More disturbing were the financial irregularities at his cardiology practice. Working with a forensic accountant, Max uncovered evidence that Winters and his partner Doherty had been overbilling insurance companies for years. Bradley needed money, Max continued. He had gambling debts, 3 ex-wives collecting alimony, an expensive taste that his legitimate income couldn't support. The plan Bradley and Sandra had concocted was elegant in its simplicity. Sandra would divorce Max, taking her legal share of his considerable assets. Then, with Bradley's medical expertise, they would ensure Max suffered a natural health crisis that would eliminate him as a problem permanently. How did you find all this out? Brooke asked, her voice barely audible. Max pointed to a photograph of an attractive woman in her 40s. Lydia Cantrell, Bradley's nurse and occasional lover. She had her own grudges against him, promises broken, promotions denied. For the right incentive, she was willing to share what she knew. Lydia had provided Max with access to Bradley's private files, including the records of a heart condition medication Bradley had prescribed to Sandra, not because she needed it, but because the side effects could mimic stress symptoms. They were building a medical narrative. Maxwell Reed was so controlling and emotionally abusive that his wife developed stress-induced cardiac issues. They were poisoning her? Brooke's face contorted in horror. Not exactly, Max replied. The medication wouldn't kill her directly, but combined with other substances, it could trigger a fatal cardiac event that would appear natural, especially with Bradley signing the death certificate. Max had compiled his evidence methodically, planning to confront Sandra with an ultimatum, a quiet, fair divorce without the theatrics and scheming or exposure of their plot. But fate, and Sandra's impatience, had intervened before he could act. The night your mother died, Max said, his voice finally showing emotion, I was meeting with my attorney. We were finalizing the divorce terms, generous ones. I wanted this chapter closed cleanly. Sandra, unaware that Max had uncovered their entire scheme, had decided to accelerate their timeline. She'd taken a double dose of her medication and mixed it with alcohol, a combination Bradley had warned could be dangerous. Her plan was to call Bradley complaining of chest pains, have him document it as stress-related, and use the medical incident as leverage in divorce proceedings. She miscalculated the dosage, Max said flatly. By the time I got home and found her unconscious, it was too late. The paramedics couldn't revive her. Brooke covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Bradley was her doctor at the hospital. He told us. He told you what they'd planned all along, Max finished for her. That your controlling, abusive father had finally pushed your mother's health past the breaking point. And in your grief, you believed him. Everyone did. The hospital scene had played out exactly as Bradley hoped. Max, stunned and grieving, faced accusations from his own children. Tyler had physically attacked him in the waiting room. Brooke had delivered the final blow. You killed her with stress. I never want to see you again. Within days, Max had been transformed from respected businessman to pariah. Bradley Winters, the grieving doctor who had tried to save Sandra, became the shoulder Brooke and Tyler cried on. The perfect cover for a man who had been planning to steal another man's wife, wealth, and ultimately, his life. After the funeral, once everyone had abandoned me, I made a decision, Max said, his voice regaining its coldness. Sandra was beyond justice. But Bradley Winters wasn't. The wall behind Max's desk held the second phase of his blueprint, a meticulously planned destruction of Bradley Winters and everyone who had helped him. So this is what you've been doing for 6 years? Brooke whispered. Planning revenge. Not planning, Max corrected, a thin smile forming on his lips. Executing. Patiently. Methodically. The way I built my business. He pointed to another photograph. Bradley Winters today, no longer the confident, handsome doctor who had seduced Sandra. Now he appeared haggard, aged beyond his years, with the haunted look of a man watching his life crumble piece by piece. What did you do to him? Brooke asked, both horrified and fascinated. I didn't do anything illegal, if that's what you're asking, Max replied. I simply made sure he received exactly what he deserved. Justice served cold. Max turned to his daughter, his eyes glacial. And now that you've returned, it's time for you to learn the final chapter of this story. Chapter 4. Calculated Demolition. The summer after Sandra's death marked the beginning of Maxwell Reed's calculated vengeance. While the town whispered about the grieving widower who had driven his wife to an early grave, Max retreated from public life, a move everyone interpreted as shame or guilt. In reality, it gave him the privacy he needed to set his plans in motion. The first rule of demolition, Max explained to Brooke as they sat in his kitchen, is to identify the load-bearing structures. Remove those, and everything else collapses naturally. Brooke clutched her coffee mug, her knuckles white. The revelations about her mother had left her reeling, but her father's cold demeanor frightened her more. The warm, tough but fair man she'd grown up with had been replaced by someone calculating and remorseless. For Bradley Winters, Max continued, his reputation was his foundation. His practice, his social standing, his relationships, all depended on people seeing him as a dedicated, ethical doctor. Max's first move had been subtle. Through a shell company, he purchased the medical building where Bradley's practice was located. No immediate changes were made, just a new property management company that began finding small issues requiring inspection, plumbing problems that necessitated closing examination rooms, electrical issues that interrupted scheduled procedures, HVAC concerns that made the environment uncomfortable for patients. Minor inconveniences, Max said with a thin smile. Nothing actionable, nothing traceable to me, just enough to create operational difficulties. Simultaneously, Max had approached Lydia Cantrell with an offer, significant financial compensation in exchange for copies of Bradley's patient records and billing documents. The nurse, bitter about her treatment and worried about her own complicity in fraudulent practices, had agreed. Wasn't that illegal? Brooke asked, her voice small. Technically, yes, Max acknowledged without remorse. But the greater crime was what those records revealed. Bradley had been falsifying diagnoses for years, recommending unnecessary procedures, prescribing medications patients didn't need. Rather than going directly to authorities, Max had taken a more circuitous approach. Anonymous letters with selected records were sent to 3 of Bradley's patients who had undergone unnecessary procedures. One was a prominent attorney. Another was a journalist. The third was the wife of a state medical board member. People are predictable, Max said. Give them evidence they've been wronged, and they'll pursue justice themselves. Within months, Bradley faced 3 separate malpractice lawsuits. The medical board launched an investigation. Local papers ran stories questioning his practice's billing methods. His insurance premiums skyrocketed. Bradley's partner, Franklin Doherty, panicked. Max continued. He offered to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. turned over everything, including records of prescriptions Bradley had written for Sandra that were medically unnecessary. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Bradley Winter's life. His medical license was suspended pending investigation. Insurance companies demanded audits and refunds. The IRS, tipped off anonymously, discovered years of unreported income. By the second year after Sandra's death, Bradley was defending himself on multiple fronts. Max said, satisfaction evident in his voice. His third ex-wife, smelling blood in the water, demanded a review of their divorce settlement. His children stopped speaking to him when the extent of his misconduct became public. Max paused, refilling his coffee cup with deliberate calm. But that was just the professional dismantling. The personal destruction required a more intimate approach. This phase had involved Marjorie Shelton, a widow 10 years Bradley's senior, whom Max had met through business connections. Marjorie, wealthy and lonely, had been susceptible to Bradley's charm when Max engineered their chance meeting at a charity function. Bradley, desperate for financial stability, saw her as a lifeline, Max explained. Within 6 months, they were engaged. 3 months after that, they were married. What Bradley hadn't known was that Marjorie's apparent wealth was largely an illusion Max had helped create. A facade of properties with underwater mortgages and investment accounts with borrowed assets. When Bradley tried to access her funds to cover his mounting legal expenses, the house of cards collapsed. Marjorie was innocent, Max admitted. I made sure she was protected financially in reality. But Bradley found himself married to substantial debt rather than substantial wealth. His final escape route blocked. By the 4th year after Sandra's death, Bradley Winters, once respected doctor, once Sandra's planned path to wealth, had filed for bankruptcy. His home had been foreclosed upon. His reputation was irreparably damaged. And still, Max wasn't finished. The final piece, Max said, reaching for a folder on the counter, was delivered 3 months ago. He handed Brooke a document, a confession from Lydia Cantrell, notarized and filed with authorities, detailing how Bradley had deliberately prescribed Sandra medication that, combined with alcohol, could trigger a fatal cardiac event. How he had discussed with Sandra ways to eliminate Max after their divorce. Bradley Winters is currently awaiting trial for his role in your mother's death, Max said flatly. Not for murder. The evidence doesn't quite support that charge. But for criminal negligence resulting in death. For conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. For medical malpractice. Brooke stared at her father, horrified understanding dawning on her face. You destroyed him. Completely. I gave him exactly what he deserved, Max corrected. Not a quick punishment. Not an easy ending. A slow, methodical dismantling of everything he valued, just as he and your mother had planned for me. Brooke pushed back from the table, her breathing shallow. What about Lydia, Franklin, Marjorie, all these other people caught in your revenge? Collateral damage, Max said without emotion. Franklin got a reduced sentence for his cooperation. Marjorie received a generous divorce settlement from my foundation. And Lydia, he paused. Lydia made her choices. She's living with the consequences. And what about us? Brooke whispered. Your family? Were we just collateral damage too? For the first time, Max's composure cracked slightly. You and Tyler made your choices when you believed Bradley over me. When you cut me out without a moment's doubt. His eyes hardened again. And now you're here because evidence forced you to reconsider, not because you trusted me. Max stood, gathering the coffee cups. There's more to this story, Brooke. Much more. But first, I want you to understand exactly what happened the night your mother died. Not the story Bradley told, but the truth I discovered afterward. Chapter 5. The Night of Reckoning. Max led Brooke to the basement, a space she'd rarely entered even as a child. Where once it had been a simple storage area, it was now a sophisticated command center. Multiple computer monitors lined one wall, displaying surveillance footage, financial tracking programs, and what appeared to be live feeds from various locations. What is all this? Brooke gasped, looking around in disbelief. Insurance, Max replied simply. After your mother's death, I learned never to be caught unprepared again. On the center screen, Max pulled up a video file dated October 17th, 6 years earlier, the night Sandra died. The footage showed the exterior of their home, captured by a security camera Max had installed months before after discovering the affair. I wasn't home when it started, Max explained. I was meeting with Lewis about the divorce settlement. The timestamp showed 7:42 p.m. when Bradley Winter's Audi pulled into the driveway. He entered using a key Sandra had given him, carrying what appeared to be a medical bag. He remained inside for 23 minutes before leaving, his expression grim but determined. I had no idea he'd visited that night until I checked the footage later, Max said. By then, it was too late. Max fast-forwarded to 9:17 p.m. when his own car appeared in the driveway. The camera captured him entering the house, then running out 17 minutes later, phone pressed to his ear, clearly calling for emergency services. I found her on the bathroom floor, Max said, his voice hollow. Unresponsive. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but they couldn't save her. The footage continued, showing the ambulance arrival, Sandra being wheeled out on a stretcher, and Max following, visibly distraught. What happened next was even more disturbing. Bradley Winters arriving at the scene, ostensibly as the responding cardiologist, consoling Max with a hand on his shoulder while emergency personnel worked frantically to revive Sandra. He knew exactly what was happening, Max said, his voice tight with controlled rage. He'd been there earlier. He knew what she'd taken. Brooke covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He let her die? Worse, Max replied, pulling up another file. An autopsy report he'd commissioned privately after Sandra's official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. Your mother had lethal levels of her heart medication in her system, combined with a sedative not prescribed to her. The combination triggered the heart attack. The implications hung heavy in the basement air. Are you saying Bradley killed her? Brooke whispered. Max's expression remained coldly neutral. I'm saying your mother trusted the wrong person. Bradley claimed later they'd argued that night, that she'd threatened to end their relationship and expose his financial irregularities if he didn't commit fully to their plan. According to Lydia Cantrell's eventual testimony, Bradley had panicked. Sandra knew too much about his fraudulent medical practices. If she turned on him, his career would be over. The visit that night had been to check on her, after she'd called complaining of chest pains, but the security footage showed he'd brought his medical bag in and out. I believe he gave her an additional dose, telling her it would help with anxiety, Max continued. Combined with what she'd already taken and the alcohol in her system, it proved fatal. For months after Sandra's death, Max had been consumed by grief and confusion, unable to reconcile the wife he thought he knew with the evidence of her betrayal. The discovery of Bradley's visit the night of her death had been the turning point, the moment grief hardened into cold, implacable resolve. The police investigated, of course, after I brought them the footage, Max explained. But Bradley had covered his tracks well. The medication was one Sandra was legitimately prescribed. No evidence remained of the additional dose. And as her doctor, his presence could be explained away. Most damningly, Bradley had immediately crafted a narrative that placed the blame squarely on Max, telling anyone who would listen about Sandra's stress-induced heart condition and Max's controlling behavior. Your brother attacked me at the funeral, Max reminded Brooke. Called me a murderer in front of everyone. You told me you never wanted to see me again. His voice remained steady, but his eyes burned with the memory. And all the while, Bradley Winters stood there, the grieving doctor who'd tried to save her. The security footage continued to the aftermath, the days following Sandra's death when Bradley had visited Brooke and Tyler, consoling them, reinforcing the narrative that their father was responsible. The camera had captured Bradley leaving Tyler's apartment with a satisfied expression that made Brooke's stomach turn. I waited, Max said simply. I gathered evidence. I built my case piece by piece. And when everything was in place, I began dismantling Bradley Winters' life with the same precision with which he and your mother had planned to dismantle mine. The revenge had been comprehensive. Beyond the professional and financial ruin Max had engineered, he'd ensured Bradley's personal life was equally destroyed. Anonymous tips to Bradley's children about their father's misconduct. Strategic leaks to social connections about his fraudulent practices. By the time Max was finished, Bradley Winters was a pariah, just as Max had been made a pariah after Sandra's death. The final piece came 3 months ago, Max said, pulling up one last file. A full confession from Lydia Cantrell about that night. According to Lydia, Bradley had called her in a panic after leaving Sandra's house, saying something had gone wrong. He'd instructed her to alter medical records the next day to support the narrative that Sandra's heart condition was stress-induced. Lydia, fearing for her own career, had complied, until Max's methodical pressure made remaining loyal to Bradley more dangerous than turning against him. Bradley Winters will spend the rest of his life in prison, Max concluded, shutting down the monitors. Not just for what happened to Sandra, but for years of medical fraud that endangered countless patients. Brooke sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she'd learned. The mother she'd idolized, the doctor she'd trusted, the father she'd rejected. All of it a carefully constructed illusion that had shattered with devastating consequences. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Why let me believe the worst for 6 years?" Max's expression remained impassive. "Would you have believed me? Over the charming doctor who held your hand at your mother's funeral? Over the mother you thought could do no wrong?" The truth of his words stung. Brooke had been so quick to accept Bradley's version of events, so eager to place blame on her father, the stern businessman whose emotional restraint had always made him seem distant. "There's one more thing you need to see," Max said, leading her back upstairs. "Something I found after your mother died that explained everything." Chapter 6. Shattered Foundations. In Max's bedroom, the room he'd once shared with Sandra for nearly 3 decades, he unlocked a hidden safe behind a painting. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages worn from repeated reading. "Your mother's diary," he explained, handing it to Brooke. "I found it while sorting through her things after the funeral." Brooke hesitated, suddenly afraid of what more she might discover about the woman she thought she knew. "Should I?" "You came here for truth," Max replied without emotion. "This is part of it." With trembling hands, Brooke opened the journal. Sandra's elegant handwriting filled the pages, dating back 5 years before her death. The early entries were mundane. Complaints about Max working too much, frustrations with her empty nest after both children left for college, descriptions of charity functions, and social obligations. Then came the first mention of Bradley Winters, 3 years before her death. "Met with Dr. Winters today for my checkup. He's new to the practice, handsome, attentive in a way Max hasn't been in years. He actually listens when I talk." The progression was textbook, innocent admiration evolving into flirtation, then into a full-blown affair. But what disturbed Brooke most were the entries from the final year. "Bradley says Max's company is worth more than I realize. With the right divorce attorney, I could get a settlement that would set us up for life. Discuss strategy with Bradley today. He says a documented medical condition would strengthen my case. Show how Max's controlling behavior has affected my health." And most chillingly, just weeks before her death, Bradley suggested a more permanent solution today. At first I was shocked, but the more I think about it, Max would never let me go easily. This way, I get everything, and Bradley and I can start fresh without looking over our shoulders. Brooke closed the journal, her hands shaking. "She was considering killing you?" "Not just considering," Max said flatly. "Planning." The medication Bradley prescribed was part of it, building a documented history of cardiac issues that would make a fatal heart attack seem natural. The irony wasn't lost on Brooke. The very scheme they'd planned for Max had ultimately claimed Sandra instead. Whether by accident or Bradley's deliberate action remained something only Bradley truly knew. "Your mother wasn't evil," Max said, surprising Brooke with this momentary softening. "She was unhappy, vulnerable to Bradley's manipulation, convinced that I was the source of her discontent rather than her own choices." For a moment, Brooke glimpsed the pain beneath her father's controlled exterior, not just the betrayal, but genuine grief for the woman he had loved for most of his adult life. "Why are you showing me all this now?" Brooke asked. "Why not right after she died? Would you have believed me then?" Max countered. "Or would you have seen it as a grieving husband trying to smear your mother's memory?" The answer was obvious. In her grief and shock, Brooke had been all too willing to accept Bradley's narrative, that her father's controlling nature had driven her mother to her death. The diary, the security footage, the evidence of conspiracy, none of it would have swayed her then. "There's something else," Max said, returning to the safe. He withdrew a sealed envelope, not the one Brooke had brought, but a similar one. "I was going to give this to you when you arrived, but I wanted you to understand the context first." Inside was a copy of Max's revised will, dated 2 months earlier. It showed that despite 6 years of estrangement, He had left substantial trusts for both his children and grandchildren. But with a significant condition, Tyler and Brooke could only access their full inheritance after reviewing all the evidence Max had compiled about Sandra and Bradley. You knew I'd come back eventually, Brooke realized. I hoped, Max corrected. But I wasn't counting on it. The will ensures that even after my death, the truth would come out. Brooke looked around the bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been when Sandra was alive. The clothes still hanging in her closet. Her perfume still on the dresser. For 6 years, Max had lived alongside these relics of his shattered marriage. You never moved on, she observed quietly. Moving on suggests there's somewhere to go, Max replied. This wasn't about grief, Brooke. It was about justice. The cold precision in his voice chilled her. This wasn't the father she remembered, the tough but fair man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had worked tirelessly to build a company that would provide security for his family. This was someone forged in betrayal's fire, hardened by rejection from those he loved most. What happens now? Brooke asked, suddenly uncertain. Bradley's facing justice. The truth about Mom is out. Is it over? Max's expression remained impassive. Bradley was only part of it. What do you mean? Your mother and Bradley didn't act alone, Max explained. They had help. Enablers. People who knew what was happening and said nothing. Or worse, people who actively assisted them. The implication hung heavy between them. Like who? Brooke asked, though part of her already feared the answer. Like your brother, Max said flatly. Tyler knew about the affair 6 months before Sandra died. He covered for her, delivered messages, even let Bradley and Sandra use his apartment to meet when I was out of town on business. Brooke shook her head vehemently. No, Tyler wouldn't. The evidence is all there. Max cut her off, gesturing toward his office. Phone records, witness statements, Tyler's own text messages to your mother, warning her when I was coming home unexpectedly. The revelation struck Brooke like a physical blow. Does Tyler know that you know? Not yet, Max replied. His day of reckoning is coming, just as yours is. Brooke felt a chill run through her. Mine. Max's eyes were cold as he regarded his daughter. You believed the worst about me without question. You cut me out of your life, and my grandchildren's lives, for 6 years. You stood by while my reputation was destroyed, my friends abandoned me, my community turned against me. His voice remained eerily calm. Actions have consequences, Brooke. Even yours. Dad, I didn't know. But you should have, Max interrupted. You should have known me well enough to at least question Bradley's version, to give me the benefit of the doubt. Instead, you delivered the final blow when you told me you never wanted to see me again. For the first time, Brooke saw the full extent of what her rejection had done to her father. The pain he'd buried beneath cold determination. The loneliness he'd transformed into methodical purpose. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I'm so sorry. Max regarded her impassively. Sorry doesn't undo 6 years, Brooke. It doesn't give me back the time I lost with my grandchildren. It doesn't restore my reputation or heal the wounds your rejection caused. What can I do? She pleaded. Tell me how to make this right. You can't, Max said simply. Some things, once broken, stay broken. But there is something you can do now. Anything, Brooke promised desperately. Max's expression hardened. You can deliver a message to your brother. Tell him I know everything. And tell him his time is running out. Chapter 7. Sins of the Sun. Tyler Reed sat across from Brooke in an upscale Portland coffee shop, looking every inch the successful architect he'd become. At 35, he had their father's imposing build and their mother's charismatic smile, a combination that had served him well professionally. His firm's modernist designs had won awards, and his recent marriage to Valerie, a prominent gallery owner, had cemented his position in the city's social elite. You actually went to see him? Tyler's disbelief was evident in his voice. After everything he did to Mom? Brooke stared at her brother, seeing him through new eyes. The handsome, confident man before her now seemed like a stranger. He didn't do anything to Mom, Tyler. You know that better than anyone. Tyler's expression flickered, surprise quickly masked by indignation. What are you talking about? Of course he did. Bradley explained exactly. Bradley Winters is facing criminal charges, Brooke interrupted flatly. For his role in Mom's death. For medical fraud. For conspiracy. She leaned forward. And Dad knows you helped them, Tyler. He knows everything. The color drained from Tyler's face. For a moment, The cultivated facade cracked, revealing panic underneath. Brooke, whatever Dad told you. He showed me evidence, she continued relentlessly. Security footage, phone records, text messages between you and Mom. Your apartment key being used when you were out of town. She slid her mother's secret phone across the table. And this, Mom's messages to Bradley, arranging meetings at your place, discussing how you were helping them coordinate. Tyler stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. You don't understand, he finally said, his voice barely audible. It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me, Brooke challenged. Explain how my brother, who spent the last 6 years calling our father a murderer, was actively helping Mom and Bradley plan to destroy him. Tyler ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. I didn't know their whole plan, Brooke. I swear. Mom just said she was unhappy, that she'd found someone who appreciated her. She said Dad was controlling her finances, that she needed my help to get some independence. And you believe that? Brooke's voice cracked with emotion. Dad, who paid for your college, your graduate school, who co-signed the loan for your first office. You believed he was financially abusing Mom. You don't know what it was like for her. Tyler's defensive tone couldn't hide his growing discomfort. Always living in his shadow, having to ask permission for every purchase, being questioned about every expense. That's not true, Brooke countered. Mom had her own accounts. She spent thousands on clothes, trips, whatever she wanted. Dad never controlled her spending. That's not how she described it, Tyler insisted, but doubt had crept into his voice. No, I imagine it wasn't, Brooke agreed coldly. Just like she probably didn't tell you she and Bradley were plotting to take everything from Dad after the divorce, or that they discussed having him eliminated permanently if he fought too hard against their plans. Tyler's face paled further. That's not possible. Mom wouldn't. I read her diary, Tyler. I saw the evidence. Mom and Bradley weren't just having an affair. They were conspiring to destroy Dad, financially, legally, and ultimately, physically. The siblings sat in tense silence as Tyler struggled to process this information. Even if that's true, he finally said, I didn't know about any of that. I just thought I was helping Mom get some space from a difficult marriage. By letting her use your apartment for an affair? Brooke's voice dripped with skepticism. By lying to Dad about where she was? By attacking him at the hospital before Mom was even declared dead? Guilt flashed across Tyler's face. Bradley called me first, he admitted quietly. Before the ambulance even reached the hospital, he told me Dad had been berating Mom, that she'd collapsed from the stress, that he was trying to save her, but it might be too late. He looked down at his hands. I was so angry when I got there. I didn't even wait for an explanation. The manipulative brilliance of Bradley's strategy wasn't lost on Brooke. By poisoning the children against their father immediately, he'd ensured Max would have no familial support during the investigation that followed, making him appear more isolated and potentially unstable. Dad has spent 6 years methodically destroying everyone involved in Mom's betrayal, Brooke said, keeping her voice low. Bradley's facing prison. His medical partners have been disgraced. Everyone who helped them has paid a price. She fixed Tyler with a hard stare. Everyone except you. Tyler's breathing had become shallow, his eyes darting nervously around the coffee shop as if expecting Max to appear at any moment. What is he planning to do? He didn't say specifically, Brooke replied. Just that your time is running out. And given what he did to Bradley, she let the implication hang between them. I need to talk to him, Tyler decided, pulling out his phone. Explain that I didn't know. He won't believe you, Brooke interrupted. Not without proof. Tyler hesitated, then lowered his voice. There is something I've kept all these years. Something that might help Dad understand why I believed Mom. From his briefcase, Tyler withdrew a sealed envelope similar to the one Brooke had found in Sandra's jewelry box. Mom gave me this 3 weeks before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should give it to a lawyer she'd been consulting. After she died, after Bradley told us Dad was responsible, I almost sent it. But something held me back. Brooke accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, not of Sandra and Bradley, but of Max with various women in business settings. Some showed him entering hotel conference rooms. Others captured him in restaurants, engaged in what appeared to be intense conversations. Alongside the photos were bank statements showing large transfers to accounts labeled only with initials. Mom said these proved Dad was having affairs, Tyler explained. That these women were getting payoffs to keep quiet. She said his business trips, his late nights, they were all covers. And you believe this? Brooke couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Tyler looked defensive. The evidence seemed convincing. The photos, the money transfers, the timing that matched his business trips. Did you ever ask him about it? Try to verify any of it before helping destroy his life. Tyler's silence was damning. Let me guess, Brooke continued, examining the photos more carefully. Bradley helped Mom compile all this. Maybe even hired the photographer. Tyler nodded reluctantly. Brooke shook her head in disbelief. Tyler, these women are business associates. Clients. This one. She pointed to a particularly damning photo of Max entering a hotel room with an attractive younger woman. Is Jennifer Zhao, Dad's lead project engineer on the Westlake development. The secret meeting was probably about the contract issues they were having. How can you be sure? Tyler challenged, though his conviction was clearly wavering. Because unlike you, I visited Dad's office. I met his team. I paid attention to his business instead of just taking the money he earned from it. Brooke's voice was sharp with disappointment. These payoffs were probably project advances or consultant fees. Did you ever once consider that before helping Bradley and Mom smear Dad's reputation? The truth was written across Tyler's face. He hadn't. He'd been all too willing to believe the worst about his father, perhaps out of his own guilt for the affair he'd been enabling. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. I'm going to give this to Dad, Brooke replied, securing the envelope. He deserves to know the full extent of the plot against him, including your role in it. Brooke, please. Tyler began, genuine fear in his voice. You have a choice, Tyler, she interrupted. You can come with me now. Face Dad directly. Explain yourself. Or you can wait for whatever he's planned for you to unfold. But either way, the truth is coming out. Tyler stared at his sister, then at the phone still displaying their mother's secret messages. The carefully constructed narrative he'd built, of an abusive father and a victimized mother, was crumbling around him. And with it, the justification for 6 years of denouncing Maxwell Reed to anyone who would listen. I'll come with you, he finally said, his voice hollow. But Brooke, you need to understand something. Whatever Mom and Bradley were planning, whatever they did, I really didn't know. I was a pawn. Then prove it, Brooke challenged. Prove it to Dad. She stood, gathering her things. We leave for his house in an hour. Be ready to face everything you've been running from for 6 years. As she walked away, Brooke wondered if Tyler could see what she now understood, that in Maxwell Reed's world of calculated justice, even pawns were held accountable for the squares they occupied on the board. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The drive to their father's house was silent, tension filling the car like a physical presence. Tyler sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, occasionally checking his phone as if hoping for some reprieve. Brooke focused on the road, her mind racing with everything she'd learned in the past 24 hours. As they pulled into the driveway, Tyler finally spoke. What if he doesn't believe me? Then you'd better have more than words to convince him. Brooke replied, her voice lacking sympathy. The brother who had abandoned their father so easily, who had believed the worst without question, now wanted understanding for himself. The irony wasn't lost on her. Max was waiting for them in his office, seated behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. He betrayed no surprise at seeing Tyler, suggesting he'd anticipated this development. The wall of evidence behind him had been reorganized, Tyler's photograph now prominently displayed in the center, surrounded by phone records, text messages, and security footage stills. 6 years, Max said by way of greeting, his voice devoid of warmth. 6 years since you attacked me in that hospital corridor, Tyler. Since you called me a murderer in front of my friends and colleagues. Tyler stood awkwardly in the doorway, visibly intimidated by the comprehensive display of his betrayal. Dad, sit down, Max commanded. Both of you. They obeyed, taking chairs across from the desk. Brooke placed the envelope Tyler had given her between them. Tyler had this, she explained. Mom gave it to him before she died. It's part of what convinced him to take her side. Max opened the envelope, examining the doctored photographs and financial records with clinical detachment. Amateur work, he assessed coldly. Any financial investigator would have seen through this in hours. I didn't know, Tyler began, his voice unsteady. Mom said you were having affairs, controlling her money. Bradley confirmed everything. I just wanted to protect her. By facilitating her affair, Max's voice remained eerily calm. By lying to my face for months? By allowing your apartment to become their meeting place? Tyler flushed with shame. I made a terrible mistake. I believed the wrong person. A mistake, Max repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. A moment of poor judgment. Is that how you'd characterize 6 years of telling everyone who would listen that I drove your mother to her death? 6 years of cutting me out of your life and your children's lives? For the first time, tears formed in Tyler's eyes. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I can't undo what I did, but I'm asking, begging, for a chance to make amends. Max's expression remained impassive. Your sister brought the same plea yesterday. Sudden remorse once the evidence became incontrovertible. He leaned forward. But where was that critical thinking 6 years ago? Where was the benefit of the doubt for the man who raised you? Neither child had an answer. The truth was damning. They had been quick to believe the worst about their father, perhaps because his emotional reserve had always made him seem distant, perhaps because Bradley and Sandra had played on that insecurity so expertly. I don't expect forgiveness, Tyler said quietly. But I need you to know I wasn't part of any plot to harm you. I was manipulated by Mom, by Bradley, but my only crime was believing them. Max regarded his son impassively. Your only crime? You're an architect, Tyler. You understand that removing a single support beam can collapse an entire structure. He gestured to the evidence wall. Your betrayal was that beam. Without it, Bradley's narrative about me would have been questioned. With my children standing beside me, his accusations would have faced scrutiny. Instead, your rejection confirmed his story in everyone's mind. The brutal assessment struck Tyler like a physical blow. He hadn't just been manipulated, he'd been weaponized against his own father. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Max opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder. These are affidavits. Statements from everyone involved in Bradley and Sandra's conspiracy. Lydia Cantrell's confession. Financial records showing Bradley's fraud. Medical documents proving he deliberately prescribed dangerous medication combinations to your mother. He slid the folder across the desk. Study it. All of it. Understand exactly what you enabled. Tyler accepted the folder with trembling hands. And then, Max continued, his voice hardening. You will make a public statement. You will acknowledge that you were wrong about me. That Bradley Winters manipulated you. That your mother was not the victim you portrayed her as. His eyes were cold. You will undo the damage you've done to my reputation. I'll do it, Tyler agreed immediately. Whatever you want. That's only the beginning, Max continued. Your architectural firm has prospered, partly due to your sob story about your poor mother and villainous father. The Reed family tragedy became part of your brand. The devoted son honoring his mother's memory through his designs. Tyler couldn't deny it. His early career had benefited from the sympathy his story generated, from clients who wanted to support the young architect whose father had driven his mother to an early grave. You will step down as principal of your firm, Max declared. You will acknowledge that your success was built partly on a lie about me. You will forfeit the Westridge project your firm recently won, a project that should have gone to Reed Construction based on experience alone. The color drained from Tyler's face. The Westridge development was his firm's most prestigious commission to date, a $40 million project that would have cemented his reputation in the industry. Dad, that's my career, everything I've built. Everything you built on my destruction, Max corrected coldly. Consider it appropriate restitution. Brooke watched the exchange with growing unease. The ruthlessness in her father's demands went beyond justice into vengeance. Dad, she interjected, isn't that? Your reckoning comes next, Brooke. Max cut her off. Don't imagine your 6 years of rejection will go unanswered simply because you came back first. The siblings sat in stunned silence, confronting the full extent of their father's calculated retribution. This wasn't a path to reconciliation. It was the final phase of Maxwell Reed's comprehensive justice, meted out with the same precision he'd applied to Bradley Winters. You have 24 hours to begin implementation, Max informed Tyler. The press release about your departure from the firm. The statement retracting your accusations against me. The formal withdrawal from the Westridge project. His voice remained unnervingly calm. If you refuse, the alternative will be significantly less pleasant. What alternative? Tyler asked, though his expression suggested he already feared the answer. Max opened another folder, revealing documents that made Tyler's face pale further. Financial irregularities in your firm's books, tax discrepancies that could interest the IRS, building code violations that weren't properly addressed in your Lakeview project. He closed the folder. I've had 6 years to examine your life, Tyler. 6 years to identify vulnerabilities. The threat was unmistakable. Cooperate with Max's demands, or face systematic destruction similar to what he'd orchestrated for Bradley Winters. You would do that, Tyler whispered. To your own son? You stopped being my son the day you chose to believe I killed your mother, Max replied without emotion. Now you're simply another person who participated in the conspiracy against me. And like all the others, you'll face consequences. The office fell silent as the siblings absorbed the reality of their situation. Their father, once the stable foundation of their lives, had been transformed by betrayal into something colder and more implacable than they could have imagined. I'll do what you ask, Tyler finally said, defeat evident in his voice. All of it. Max nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. Brooke will verify your compliance. Now leave. I need to speak with your sister alone. Tyler rose on unsteady legs, clutching the damning folder of evidence. At the doorway, he paused. For what it's worth, Dad, I am truly sorry. Not just because I was wrong, but because I failed you when you needed me most. Max's expression remained unchanged. Words are meaningless, Tyler. Only actions matter now. After Tyler's departure, Brooke sat alone before her father's desk, bracing herself for whatever punishment he had designed for her own betrayal. Your terms? She asked quietly. What will my penance be? Max studied his daughter for a long moment. Your husband's medical practice has expanded significantly in recent years. Brooke felt a chill at the direction of his statement. Leave Alan out of this. He had nothing to do with any of it. His success is built partly on connections through your mother's family. Max continued as if she hadn't spoken. Referrals that should have dropped away when my businesses were blacklisted after your mother's death. Dad, please, Brooke pleaded. Punish me if you must, but not my family. Not my children. For the first time, a flicker of something, not quite emotion, but perhaps recognition, crossed Max's face. You're worried about your children. Concerned they might suffer for your mistakes. Yes, Brooke admitted. The same children you kept from me for 6 years? Max let the question hang between them. The grandchildren who don't know me? Who were taught their grandfather was a monster? The truth of his words stung. Brooke had denied Max a relationship with Emma and Jacob, convinced he was responsible for their grandmother's death. No birthday visits. No Christmas mornings. No graduations or school plays. 6 years of moments that could never be recovered. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely audible. Max opened the final drawer of his desk and withdrew a leather-bound document. This is my revised will. Under its terms, you and Tyler receive nothing directly. Instead, trusts are established for your children. Trusts that I control until my death, and which have specific conditions attached. What conditions? Brooke asked warily. That they spend time with me. Regular visits. Holidays. Summer vacations. Max's voice remained businesslike, but Brooke detected the longing beneath it. That they learn who I really am, not the villain in their parents' story. The request, disguised as a demand, revealed what Max truly wanted. Not financial retribution from Brooke, but the family connection he'd been denied. The chance to know his grandchildren before it was too late. And if I agree? Brooke asked carefully. Then your husband's practice remains untouched. Your comfortable life continues. Max's eyes hardened again. But understand this, Brooke, there is no forgiveness here. No reconciliation. You and Tyler made your choice 6 years ago. All I'm offering is a business arrangement regarding the next generation. The coldness of his terms cut Brooke deeply. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that her return might open a path to healing. Instead, Max was making it clear. He would have a relationship with his grandchildren, but his children had forfeited any claim to his heart. I understand, she said quietly. I'll bring Emma and Jacob this weekend. Max nodded once, the matter settled. There's one more thing. He slid a final document across the desk. Bradley Winters' sentencing hearing is next month. You and Tyler will both make victim impact statements. You will publicly acknowledge his manipulation and your mother's role in what happened. The final humiliation, a public admission of how thoroughly they had been deceived, how completely they had failed their father. "We will," Brooke agreed, knowing refusal wasn't an option. As she rose to leave, a question that had been haunting her finally escaped. "Did you ever love her? Even after everything she did?" For a brief moment, Max's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the pain he'd locked away. "I loved the woman I thought I married," he said quietly. "That woman never existed." Brooke nodded, understanding at last the true extent of her father's loss. Not just his wife, but the very foundation of his life's narrative. Everything he believed about his marriage had been a carefully constructed lie. "I'll see myself out," she said, moving toward the door. "Brooke," Max called after her. When she turned, his expression had returned to its impassive mask. "Don't mistake this arrangement for reconciliation. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. I'm doing this for Emma and Jacob, not for you." "I know, Dad," she replied softly. "I know." Chapter 9. Cold Justice. 1 month later, the county courthouse was packed for Bradley Winter's sentencing hearing. The case had captivated the community. A respected cardiologist revealed as a fraud, implicated in his lover's death, his entire career exposed as a house of cards built on deception and malpractice. Maxwell Reed sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his expression revealing nothing as he watched the man who had nearly destroyed his life shuffle into the courtroom in handcuffs. At 63, Bradley looked 20 years older, his handsome features hollowed by stress, his confident demeanor replaced by the vacant stare of a man who had lost everything. Behind Max sat Brooke and Tyler, both dressed somberly for their roles as character witnesses. In the months since their confrontation in Max's office, Tyler had fulfilled every demand, stepping down from his firm, withdrawing from the Westridge project, issuing a public statement retracting his accusations against his father. His career lay in ruins, his reputation tarnished by his own admission of being duped by Bradley and Sandra. Brooke had complied as well, bringing Emma and Jacob to meet the grandfather they'd been taught to fear. The initial visits had been awkward, tentative, but Max had surprised her with his patience around the children. With them, and only with them, he showed glimpses of the man he'd been before betrayal transformed him. The proceedings began with the prosecution's summary of charges: criminal negligence resulting in death, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, medical malpractice, falsification of medical records. The evidence was overwhelming, bolstered by Lydia Cantrell's detailed testimony about Bradley's pattern of misconduct with Sandra and other patients. When it came time for victim impact statements, Max declined to speak. Instead, he nodded to Tyler, who approached the podium. 6 years ago, I stood in a hospital corridor and accused my father of killing my mother. Tyler began, his voice steady despite the cost of this public confession. I believed the lies Dr. Winters told me, that my father's controlling behavior had caused the stress that led to her death. I rejected my father without question, without investigation, because I trusted that a doctor would tell the truth. Tyler detailed how Bradley had manipulated him, using him as an unwitting accomplice in the affair and the subsequent smear campaign against Max. How he had spent years perpetuating a narrative that he now knew to be false. My father didn't kill my mother, Tyler concluded, looking directly at Bradley. But you, Dr. Winters, contributed to her death through negligent care, inappropriate medication, and a conspiracy that ultimately claimed the life of your accomplice instead of your intended victim. Brooke spoke next, her testimony equally damning. She described how Bradley had positioned himself as the family's compassionate advisor after Sandra's death, all while knowing his own culpability. How he had systematically turned Sandra's children against their father to protect himself. Throughout both statements, Bradley stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Only when the judge asked if he wished to speak before sentencing did he finally acknowledge Max's presence, turning slightly to meet the cold stare of the man whose life he had tried to destroy. I never meant for Sandra to die, Bradley said, his voice hoarse from disuse. It was supposed to be you. The blunt admission sent murmurs through the courtroom. The judge called for order as Bradley continued. She was just supposed to get sick enough to strengthen her case against you. The medication was meant to create symptoms, not. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Did you give her an extra dose that night? Max asked, speaking for the first time, his voice carrying in the hushed courtroom. Bradley hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. She threatened to expose me if I backed out of our plan. Said she'd go to the medical board about my billing practices. I panicked. His shoulders slumped. I never thought it would kill her. The judge's sentence was severe, 15 years for criminal negligence resulting in death, with additional concurrent terms for the fraud and malpractice charges. No possibility of parole for at least 10 years. As officers led Bradley away, he cast one final glance at Max, not with hatred, but with something that looked almost like respect for the methodical destruction Max had engineered. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Max walked past them without comment, his children following in his wake. Only when they reached the parking lot did he finally speak. "It's done," he said simply. "Justice has been served." Brooke looked at her father uncertainly. "Does this mean, can we start to rebuild now? As a family?" Max's expression remained impassive. "There is no rebuilding, Brooke. Sandra and Bradley destroyed what we had. Your and Tyler's betrayal ensured it could never be recovered." "Dad, please," Tyler interjected. "We've admitted we were wrong. We've done everything you asked. At some point, there has to be forgiveness." "Does there?" Max countered coldly. "Some choices can't be unmade. Some wounds don't heal. You chose Bradley's lies over my truth. You abandoned me when I needed you most. That decision defined who you are, just as my response defined who I am." He looked between his children, his eyes hard as flint. "I'll honor our arrangement regarding Emma and Jacob. They deserve to know their grandfather. But don't mistake access for reconciliation. What Sandra, Bradley, and both of you broke cannot be fixed." "So that's it?" Brooke asked, tears forming. "After everything, after justice has been served, you still can't forgive us?" "Forgiveness implies the debt is canceled," Max replied. "Some debts can only be acknowledged, never erased." He turned to leave, then paused. "Friday at 6. Bring the children for dinner. Their grandparents on your husband's side, fill them with sugar. I'll need to establish different expectations." With that, he walked to his car alone, his posture unbending, his resolve intact. Behind him, Brooke and Tyler stood in the cold shadow of the courthouse, confronting the final truth about their father. Maxwell Reed had never been a man who accepted betrayal from anyone, not his wife, not her lover, not even his own children. As Max drove away, he felt neither triumph nor closure, only the cold satisfaction of a project completed according to plan. Sandra was gone. Bradley was facing justice. His children had been held accountable. All debts had been settled. In the quiet of his car, Max allowed himself a single moment of reflection on what might have been: a family intact, grandchildren who had known him from birth, a legacy of more than just wealth and retribution. Then, with the disciplined compartmentalization that had defined his life, he locked those thoughts away. Some men might seek redemption through forgiveness. Maxwell Reed had chosen a different path: cold, precise justice that asked no quarter and offered none in return. In the carefully ordered ledger of his life, every account had now been balanced. It would have to be enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.